Hello and welcome to episode 34 of the Chall podcast, a Call of Duty esports podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, we are going to be running through the first week of the Call of Duty League. The 2022 season is upon us. We have actually went through an actual week. We've seen some incredible matches and some upsets. We're also going to be previewing and giving our predictions, hopefully a little bit better for me this coming week, but we're going to try to give our predictions for the next week of matches as we go to week 2 in these qualifying matches for the first major in the Call of Duty League season. And we're also going to touch on some ranked play and the second season of Call of Duty Vanguard, give you some news and notes on that and give our opinions. Well, Bink will give you his opinions mostly. So we have a pretty cool show coming at you tonight. How are you doing, Bink?
Doing all right. Long day, but ready to talk some COD.
Yeah, your day is usually longer than mine since you have to deal with all of the stuff, the games, and it's a little more busy on your end at least. Let's get into it. We did our preview episode last week where we talked about what we kind of thought of the 12 Call of Duty League teams, and we gave our predictions for how these, I believe there were 10 matches last week, how we thought those matches would go based on just kind of our thoughts on the teams and what we saw from the Kickoff Classic. Suffice to say, you did a lot better than me at predicting the matches, which I'm not too surprised, but I'm kind of surprised just how badly I did. But let's go through these matches. So we had 3 matches to start on the first day, which is Friday, February 4th. The first match of the league season was London versus Florida, and both of us picked Florida to win this. London was not a good team last year, and we didn't really get to see a whole lot of them in the Kickoff Classic because they got swept. Florida, they've been kind of the middle of the road, a little bit higher at times over the past 2 seasons, and obviously both of us thought they would be a little bit stronger, but they are actually swept. They got swept by London this week in the first match of the season. What did you think of this? How surprised are you to see that the Royal Ravens swept the Mutineers?
I was moderately surprised. I'm not going to say I was super shocked. Obviously, I predicted Florida, but it's not like, like Florida is like this heavily like a strong contender or highly ranked team coming into the season too. These were 2 teams both in the lower half of the power rankings in the eyes of many people within the community and coaches, etc. So although in my eyes, based on that Kickoff Classic, it felt like a lot of people weren't like really hyping up London or anything like that, regardless of the Kickoff Classic. And then you go into that preseason event again, can't really take too much away from that, like we talked about last week. But Florida did win uh, their match, I believe, against LAG, and then I think London lost to Seattle, which in hindsight now, it's looking like Seattle's a really good team, so that there might not have been too much to take away from that result. But yeah, for London to come out in 3-0 Florida like this, I was decently surprised. I honestly that it was still in my work shift while I'm editing stuff, so I really don't remember the matches like too well. But just looking at the scores for the series, it was started Gavutu Hardpoint 250 to 119 for London. Desert Sea Search was 6-1 London, and then the control on Gavutu was 3-1. So it's not really like these maps were necessarily close in a lot of regards. If you look at the final stats for the match provided by Breaking Point, everybody on London had a positive KD. Gizmo, most notably, had a 1.63, was 57 and 35. And the lowest KD was 0 at 39 and 30, which was a 1.3. So everybody performed well there. And then Awakening had a 0.98, and everybody was negative on Florida. I did see some chatter on Twitter after the match. Skies tweeted, I don't know why we played on the London server. Those were the hardest kills ever. And I think it was Ogre One who like tweeted like a map like joking about it because the London players are in North Carolina, I believe, and obviously the Florida
Yep.
players are in the Florida headquarters. So like Ogre One like drew an arrow of like like the distance from Florida to Virginia and NC to Virginia, just like to show that disparity. So, might not have been an ideal situation for Florida in terms of the servers there, but these are online matches. That's always going to be a factor, and it's just some players are going to have to deal with, and unfortunately, it just didn't break Florida's way in that regard this time. But definitely not going to put like all the blame and say oh, Florida only got swept here because they were playing on a disadvantaged server. Um, London took care of business. So um, surprising, and I really, I'm not saying it's a super big upset or just like super surprised by it, but it was an upset in the eyes of many people, and a somewhat surprising result to start off the 2022 regular season.
Yeah, it's I guess for maybe it's just me, and maybe this isn't the case for other people, but I have a hard time getting the idea of teams and like their reputations out of my head before a new season, because what I remember of London is what I saw last season, and the same could be said for Florida, where I said at basically throughout the entire season last year that Florida should be a really good team. They should be, a top five team, really. And I think I'm kind of holding on to that. And the same with London. I'm thinking, oh, they should be a bottom four team because that's what we saw out of them last year. They were one of the worst teams in the league. And a lot of that has to do with the pandemic and the visa issues that came along with it. But for me, just getting these like old rosters and these past iterations of their rosters out of my head is very difficult. So I think maybe picking Florida in hindsight obviously was a bad idea, but that's London just played really well, and then we got to see both of these teams play later on in the weekend,
Yep.
and London still looked good. So it wasn't that Florida, at least it appeared that Florida isn't just a bad team that just got stomped by a good team. It does seem that
And
London is a good team, and Florida might actually be pretty good too, or this might just
they,
been a bad series to reflect their true skill.
yeah, they certainly flipped a switch in their second match of the week, which we'll talk about in a bit.
And just to talk about the online issues, that was something we talked about from the get go last week when we went through our predictions, because these qualifying matches are all online. And I mean, it's been talked about ad nauseum about from players for the past like several years that these really important matches that are online are not a true reflection of teams a lot of times. Seattle was very adamant about that last year when they overperformed expectations at the first LAN of the season after being like, I think they were the worst team in the league coming into that major because of online play. So it's hard to judge teams based on their online play, and we're going to see teams bring up these excuses, which could be legitimate excuses, but it's not going to change anything. The results don't change. It's not like Florida gets a win back because they played on a different server than London, or a different server than they should have. So just be prepared, everybody, for everybody complaining about online issues for the rest of the season. Let's move on to this next match where the Boston Breach, they debuted in the Call of Duty League. They had their first CDL match, and unlike the previous match, this was actually a very close contest. We had Boston coming away with the victory 3-2 over the Los Angeles Guerrillas, and I'm actually supporting LAG. I should yeah, right there. So I said it last week that I should be supporting them and I should be wearing their merch. And this wasn't their best showing, I'll admit, but later on in the weekend they did make me a proud LAG merch owner. But this match, we had Boston come away with the win. You correctly predicted this match. I did not, even though I've been known to on this podcast support LAG through thick and thin or mostly just then. So what do you think of this? Boston beating LAG in their first match.
Yeah, I think I can't remember exactly what I said last week about this match, but I feel like going into it, I felt it was not necessarily a coin flip, but I felt like it could have been a very close match.
Hmm.
A lot of talent on the LAG team, and we've heard a lot of good things about Boston in early season scrims, and seems like they might be, um, performing better than some people would expect for the 12th team in the league coming in, seemingly being at a disadvantage, having to field a last minute roster. Um, it doesn't seem like that's like severely hindering them or anything yet, at least, or at this point. So, um, yeah, I think the big takeaway here was that Boston won both searches. London, geez, sorry. LAG won both hard points, but Boston took the searches, and that age-old adage of search wins championships. I guess here we can take it over to search wins online qualifier matches.
Nice. Uh, I I think the biggest takeaway for me is that Capsidal is the real deal. Like for a guy that I had no clue about really before the season, and now he's in the CDL and he's facing Slasher and Gunless and Hook. Like for him to have the highest, or I guess tied for the highest KD in the series with Gunless, and be an actual factor for his team in winning a CDL match. It's just a testament to how well Boston scouted their roster that they were able like and for like methods and TJ and Nero like to come up with him. And he's a lot of teams, they really don't pick like the underrated guys. They don't pick guys that aren't well known a lot of times because you see like older, maybe less talented CDL or COD pros gets chance after chance, excuse me. And for Capsule to come out and just be the absolute beast that he is, it's really surprising. It's awesome to see. We saw a lot of great rookie play this weekend, and we'll get to it when I think the next match was Seattle and stuff. So, but yeah, Capsule, he was my big takeaway from this.
Yeah, and I mean, looking at the stats for this again provided by Breaking Point, um, it's kind of interesting. I feel like um, just looking at the total number of kills, Methods had 97. Everybody else in the series had over 100 kills. I feel like, I mean, I could be wrong here. There could be some outliers, but I feel like aside from like the was it best of nine? Best of nine in the grand finals. Aside from like those long grand finals in the majors last year, I feel like we didn't really see a lot of triple digit kill performances, and especially in best of five series. And map one was Bokage Hardpoint in this series, 250, 237. So not only was it Bokage, which seems to be, like engagement heaven, there's a lot of gunfights going on there, but it was a super close Bokage, which means they were playing for a long time. So that could obviously play a factor and inflate the kill numbers here a little bit, but that's still something to keep an eye on, um, to see, throughout the year, what kind of kill numbers we can get up to. Because I mean, for a series like this, if we see so Gunless and Capsule both have 111 kills. Well, I guess we'll see if we go through the rest of these matches if anybody passes 111 this week, but that could be like the overall series record very easily right now.
Yeah, with Bokage in the rotation, it's going to be really difficult for those kill numbers not to be high. Especially like you said, if it goes down to the wire and these teams are going like 250 to 249 or going down to the time limit, there's no way that nobody like somebody's going to drop like 65, 70 kills in a map. Like it's just
I don't know about that, but
you don't think so?
it
You
could
don't
happen. Well, we can talk about it later, but I think the highest so far was 46 by Vivid on Bokage.
I just think like especially if I don't know. I have a feeling that I don't know. I have a feeling that there will be a breakout performance, and it'll probably be with like Optic or something where they're outslaying or whatever, but they're not getting all the time, which is a classic Optic thing, and it just turns out to be like a slay heavy game. But maybe I'm wrong, and
I think 60 is very ambitious. I think 50 is like, like a 50 bomb on Bokage is like kind of eye opening.
yeah.
I just scrolled back. If we look, the the scoreboard for this Bokich hardpoint in particular, again, 250 to 237. So like aside from like 250 to 249, this is like kind of as long of a Bokich game as you're likely gonna get.
Mhm.
Dunless led the lobby with 41 kills. TJ had
Yeah,
the most
maybe
on
I am
Boston
being
with
too
40.
ambitious.
So yeah, I think 70 is definitely not happening.
Yeah,
If 60 happens, that'd be really cool, and it would probably be outlandish. I think 50 is the mark to beat right now, and anything above that would be really cool.
yeah. Let's move on to this. So we had a third match on Friday. We had New York versus Seattle. We split the prediction. So you went with Seattle and I went with New York. I believe my reasoning was that I was going to go with the more talented or more experienced roster on paper to start off the season, just kind of as a baseline. And I was wrong, which is a very surprising thing. It doesn't happen too often on this podcast or even in life in general, but Seattle, they swept New York 3-0. And I would say this is like it is an upset in that New York has two of the greatest Call of Duty players of all time on their roster, and Seattle has two rookies and Accuracy, who was benched last season, and Mac, who was, I think, being considered for being benched, but he was also on New York last season. So a lot of things seemed like, I don't know. I think Seattle, they looked incredible, and they continued to look incredible in their second match, which we'll get to. But what did you think of the Seattle beating New York?
Well, you just reminded me. I didn't even think about it at the time. And we're not going to get out of order here, but in New York's other match of the week, a certain they played against a team with a certain member of New York's team last year. Um, and then in this series, like you just mentioned with Mac, he was on New York last year, and it's kind of a revenge series for him. He gets the win over his team from last year. Um, but for me, I think I had a hesitant prediction with Seattle in both of their series for this weekend. I remember saying on the pod that like I'm going with Seattle, expecting them to let me down, just because again, kind of like you said earlier in this show, that's just like hard to get like your thoughts or what you've thought about these past iterations of certain franchises from previous years. It's hard to get rid of those heading into a new season where although this is the Seattle Surge franchise that has struggled in the first two seasons of CDL, it's a completely different team, completely new coach, completely new GM, and um, you know, early season so far that they're showing that this is not the same old Seattle Surge that CDL fans are accustomed to. Um, I think looking at the maps, it's not like Seattle like completely blew out New York. Tuscan Hardpoint was 250 to 171, not necessarily super close, but not a blowout or 100-point club. And then it was 6-5 in Bokid Search and 3-2 in Gavutu Control. I feel like we can talk about Control. I mean, I guess we can just talk about it now in general. Um, just the nature of Gavutu Control, I feel like we're going to see a lot of 3-2s where there's 5 defensive wins. Just because it's the one control point is in the boat on Gavutu over to the right if you're pushing from offense, and then the other point is like on the beach, way to the left, and it's heavily like if you look at the mini map, it's just distinctly closer to the defensive spawn than the offensive spawn. So even if you get that 1 point, I think it's A in the boat. If you get that 1 point, you still have a huge uphill battle to try and capture that B point. So I think we're going to see a lot of defensive round wins on Gavutu unless something changes with the spawns or the points or anything like that. So I don't think 3-2 is like there's much to take away from that. It could be more allocated to the map than actually like how the teams performed. But again, the just point here being that Seattle gets a sweep, but it's not like it was a huge blowout. I guess is just the main point I'm taking away. Even though you look at the stats, all the players on New York were negative. Krim had the best KD at 0.97. And even Accuracy and Mac went negative, but the new rookie duo there on Seattle, Sib with a 1.37 and Pred with a 1.8 or 1.18. Sorry.
Yeah, the hard point is the obviously the most lopsided win of
Yeah.
the series for Seattle, but just the fact that they even won this series, I think it's just surprising. I guess it shouldn't be all that surprising because we knew what the coaches thought of Seattle coming into the regular season, and they had a better reputation in the preseason than New York did. Maybe that's because of the lack of practice that New York has. I think Clayster said that they haven't really practiced a whole lot because of like the holidays and Hydra coming back from France and everything. But still a really surprising win, and it definitely was a good start for your Rookie of the Year pick. Sib, 39 kills on the opening hard point, 9 in the search, and he was still positive in the control, but Pred, my Rookie of the Year, 37 kills on Gavutu control. So I mean that's just a great start for Seattle. And obviously they did keep it up as the weekend went along. But yeah, so great start for
And
Seattle. Oh, what did you say?
I was just gonna say, just because it was just like fresh in our mind, we were just talking about that Boston series. Um, this was only a three map series, obviously, and Sib and Pred had 77 overall kills. Sib had 77, and that's in a three map series with no bokage. So compare that to the 111 we saw from Capsidal and Gunless. That could be an early indication to the inflation provided by bokage that we were mentioning earlier.
Yeah. The next day we had 4 matches. So the first was Atlanta versus Paris, which we were kind of memeing about on the podcast last week. We were talking about how it would be a huge upset if Atlanta could beat Paris. And we were, I mean, if you didn't know anything about Call of Duty esports and you just watched this match, you would think that, okay, like Atlanta must be like a team fighting for their life trying to beat this like powerhouse that is Paris because Paris looked really really good and Atlanta just squeaked out a victory. They win 3-2 and hand Paris their first loss of the season. What were your takeaways from this Atlanta versus Paris series?
Yeah, my big takeaway is just the Gavutu factor. Seems like for Atlanta here, and I can't remember. I believe it was on the flank. Aches and Zuma were mentioning it that but just the way that matches are set up right now, because there are only two control maps, whichever team wins the coin flip ahead of the matches and like gets to pick whether they want to be team A or B for the vetoes, they essentially get to pick which control map is played because they get to ban one of the control maps and then there's only one left, so that's just automatically the control map. So I believe in this situation, Paris wins the coin toss, and then we see Gavutu played as the control, which we were just talking about that in the past series. But aside from the defensively favored nature of the map, it's also a AR heavy map, which uh, doesn't exactly favor the phase boys. I don't think um, like we've seen Simp use an AR at times in the past, but obviously it's just the Tiny Terrors are known for being those aggressive subs in your face, slaying heavy with an SMG. And if one of them, if you're playing on a map like Gavutu, that's right now mostly 3 ARs, one sub, one of those main sub players has to be uh, running an AR. And for a team like Paris, like sure they have John and Decimate who are both mainly SMG players, but I think Desi has been considered a flex at some points and he can use an AR. So I just think that was a map that favored um, Paris's lineup construction more than phase, and it's something we're gonna have to look out for the rest of the season until potentially another control map is added or anything like that. But yeah, like Atlanta wins this series 3-2, and the two maps that they lost in the series were Gavutu Hardpoint and Gavutu Control. So um, I believe in their second series, I could be wrong. I wanted to go back and look, but I forgot to. I think they ended up vetoing both Gavutu Hardpoint and Control, in their second series, and obviously we'll talk about that series when we get there. But yeah, that's just something, aside from Paris, coming out and proving some doubters wrong with a good performance here, despite not getting the win. Um, Atlanta ends up taking the W, but we're gonna have to keep an eye on that Gavutu situation for this team going forward, I think. But in terms of positives, FaZe do end up getting the win, and they do it by winning the searches. They took Desert Siege 6-3 and Berlin Surge 6-1. So um, you expect the team. We've talked. Obviously, we talked about FaZe a lot on the podcast, but we talked about it last year. They were strong at surging at the beginning of Cold War. They went through that little lull in like stage 2, I think, and then stage 3 they brought in Tupac to help with S&D coaching, and really since then they've been a strong S&D team. So it's looking to continue to be a factor for them in the season too.
We saw this last season with Atlanta that they would try things out in the regular season in the they were like the group play matches before the major just to kind of test themselves and to get, the qualifying matches are as good of practice as you're going to get because everyone is trying their hardest to win the map. So, Atlanta losing on Gavutu, it's, I wouldn't say it's worrisome because it's so early in the season that
Yeah.
it would be an overreaction, but it's, like I'm sure they knew what their limitations were coming in, but it's also nice to have it on film and for like Tupac and for Crowder and RJ to have like that, just like the proof, like what we could do better. Like, why are we losing Gavutu? Okay, like here's what we could do in the future to help with that. And I think that's always good for Atlanta. And we've seen, like you said, when they're weak at something or relatively weak, they're not real weak in any aspect. But if they feel like they're not up to par on something, like they're gonna improve on it and they're gonna get a lot better, and they're probably gonna end up being one of the best teams in the league at it eventually. So we'll see if Gavutu is really gonna be like a big problem for them, or if they'll just keep getting better at it.
Yeah, and I don't think it'll necessarily be a huge problem. Like,
Mhm.
it's not like Sib and Abizi can't shoot straight with an AR in their hand.
Yeah.
It's just obviously not. I mean, I could be wrong here, but I don't think it's their preferred weapon. At least historically, based on their career. So, yeah, like you said, we're just gonna have to keep an eye on whether they veto Gavutu consistently, or B, if it gets through the series, how they're performing throughout the season on it.
Moving on, we had London versus Optic, and in the biggest upset of the weekend, London they reverse sweep Optic and they win 3-2. We both got this prediction wrong. I guess I should mention Atlanta versus Paris. We did end up getting the prediction right because we both picked Paris. But London, they come in and they beat Optic, hand them their first loss of the season. What did you take away from this really, really big upset?
I mean, again, we got to give credit to London, right? And I mean, I was going to mention it with that last match. You kind of touched on it at the beginning, but we were kind of trolling last podcast about like picking Atlanta to be a major upset over Paris and Optic to be a major upset over London. Like we were kind of, joking around about it a little bit. And we both were expecting, based on the talent on the team, the FaZe and Optic teams, and just like preseason rankings and everything we had seen up to this point, it was basically like two Atlanta and Optic, two teams in the top 4 of most people's opinions, and then London and Paris were two teams in the bottom 4 in the eyes of many people. So we were both fully expecting to see the favored teams take the wins convincingly here, and that's just not what happens in this second match. So and obviously, even in the first match, Paris proved people wrong just by having that series be closer than a lot of people thought. So, yeah, this was definitely an interesting one. Props again to London for being able, such a young team there, Afro in his second year, but didn't spend a full year in the CDL. So he's basically like half of a rookie, I guess. I don't 1.5 in year 1.5. And then you got two rookies there with 0, 0 coming back after not being in the CDL last year. It's just, you know, for a team like that with essentially three rookies, is what I was trying to say, to pull off a reverse sweep against a heavily favored Optic team, and I think it says a lot about this London squad and the potential that they have to be turning some heads throughout this season.
I don't know what the best maps are for London because we've only seen two series, but
Yeah.
the fact that they beat Optic pretty handily on Berlin Hardpoint to force a game 5 is pretty surprising because historically Optic is a very good hardpoint team, and I mean and London also beat them on Control, which is obviously not the biggest thing because there's only two maps or whatever, but uh, beating Optic on hardpoint, that seems like a big deal to me. And it wasn't like a fluke win. They barely lost Bokich hardpoint to start off the series. They went down to the time limit, and then the second one they win by 100 points. And Afro drops 27, Nasty drops 27, and nobody in Optic has a positive KD. And I mean, it's a very impressive win. I don't like it's always one of those things like, is this a bigger win for London or a bigger loss for Optic? And I would say it's a bigger win for London. Like, they earned it. They barely lost on the Berlin Search and Destroy, and then they came out with a round 11 win on Boca's S&D, which is like, that's incredible. Like, you're the way you see stars is like in the tightest and the hardest moments, like they come up big. And Afro drops 11, Gizmo drops 12 in a 11 round game 5 S&D against Optic, and Shotzi dropped 13. So like he did his job, but just a really great win for London, and kind of the start of a pretty bad week for Optic in the green wall.
And so we can talk about Optic a little more in depth after we get to their second match here. But the one thing I do want to note here is that it's not like, yes, it was a reverse sweep, which obviously you don't want to see if you're an Optic fan, but it's also not like a reverse sweep where they just got completely blown out in the last three maps. Like, sure, like you mentioned, that hard point game 4 wasn't necessarily close, but the game 5, which the one that counts with all the marbles there, it's 6-5 and comes down to around 11. So um, we can talk more about Optic later, but we have talked a lot about just Optic and struggles in S&D with past iterations of the team. But I think it's going to be a little different for this squad because this isn't the Dynasty team or the same old Optic that we're used to. They have a guy like Illy there, and known S&D star, and Shotzi's been pretty good at S&D in his young Call of Duty career. So that's my takeaway from this series from like, like a silver lining perspective is if you're gonna lose that last map, at least you lost 6-5. It's better than losing than 6-0.
The next match of the week, we had Seattle versus Toronto in a rematch of the Kickoff Classic Finals. And this was one that we were really looking forward to because Seattle looked very, very good in their first match of the week. And Toronto, they won the Kickoff Classic. They beat Seattle, and they were coming off a second place finish at the last CDL Champs. So we had a lot of expectations for Toronto. Seattle comes away with the win. Game 5, round 11, round 11, Ninja Defuse by the Iceman himself, ice in his veins. Just an incredible win. Not only because it gave Seattle probably their first, like, I don't want to say that it's their first time winning two matches in a week, but it might be like in the league's history because they were, I think they won single digit matches in both of the first two seasons in the CDL. So this is a really big win for them. They beat Toronto, who is probably going to be one of the best teams in the league. And they've been one of the best teams in the league since last season. Just an incredible win. What are your takeaways from Seattle's? This would be an upset. What do you think of their upset over the Ultra?
Yeah, this is another one. I picked Seattle to win this, but it was a very reluctant pick on my part, and it was one where again I said like, yeah, I'm gonna pick Seattle here, but wouldn't be surprised if Toronto wins it. And a lot of people, like you mentioned, Toronto had just beat Seattle in the finals of the Kickoff Classic, so in the eyes of some people, Toronto were the best team in the game heading into the official start of the regular season, just because of that limited result in the preseason event. So. I guess this was technically an upset, but it was a super entertaining series, and I think end of the day, Seattle does get the win, but Toronto certainly made them work for it, and um, without that ninja diffuse that we're talking about a reverse sweep here by Toronto in a series that Seattle goes up 2-0, convincingly winning maps 1 and 2. And then if there's no ninja diffuse there, we see the series just essentially slip right through their fingers, and we're talking about a completely different narrative from this match here. So, um, shout out to Accuracy for pulling off that diffuse. For the brand
That's
here,
what he does.
we like to say send the Chall, but we are also a big advocates of the ninja diffuse. So, um, it's always entertaining to see, and obviously, some people argue that like ninja diffuses are easier online because of there's no like crowd factor that could ruin it or spoil it at like a live event. Um, but I don't think that's just something to bring up. I don't think it obviously plays a huge role here. It's just something to think about. Like maybe we'll see some ninja diffuses once we're back to LAN events, but obviously it's tough again. You got a whole crowd of 10,000 plus people screaming, and guy goes and checks it and spoils it. It obviously takes away from that. So um, we don't see a lot of ninja diffuses, so it's always exciting when we do get to see them. And yeah, this is a loss for Toronto. I think that's not like um, a devastating loss, but it's one that you go back, it might sting a little bit, just because they were so close to pulling off her reverse sweep and just starting 1-0 as opposed to 0-1. But again, it shows, like we've talked about numerous times with this Toronto team, just how composed they are. Um, they have a lot of chemistry there, and in the face of adversity, when they're down 0-2, they come as close as you can to pulling off the reverse sweep without actually doing it.
You make a great point about the narrative aspect of this is that and not just us, but like the community at large would basically be talking about look how composed Toronto are. They're like the veterans. They know like they don't get frazzled by going down 2-0 to Seattle. And then on the flip side, you'd be like, oh, Seattle, this young team, they don't know how to win in the clutch. They lose on a game 5 round 11 after getting reverse swept. That's like how fluky it is, and maybe fluky isn't the right word, but just like how up in the air it is that
Yeah,
things could change. Like, and this is online, so there is a little bit like there is obviously a difference between this and LAN, and like reputations of an entire team or reputations of players can be like really altered by just like one round in search and destroy. Same with like London Optic. Optic, they win that game 5, round 11, and I mean they win that match, and people aren't talking about like, oh my god, like is Optic in trouble, or how
yeah.
good is London or whatever. So I just think that's interesting, an interesting point that you bring up about like the narratives that we kind of create based on like very little data. Um, and then we had this last match on Saturday. We had New York versus LAG. Both teams lost their opening matches in the season, and we both went with New York in this one. But LAG, they come out on top. We talked to you mentioned it like briefly earlier, but Asim was on the subliners last season, and he had an incredible control map. Even though they lost that map, the Gorillas did, but yeah, just LAG, they come back, they bounce back, which is obviously what you want to see after getting beat by Boston 3-2. So, what'd you think of New York LAG?
Yeah, and just real quick before we completely move on from that last series, since we mentioned it in Seattle's previous series, Sib drops a 1.4 KD in that series against Toronto, went 102 and 73. So I guess inflating my ego a little bit for the Rookie of the Year pick. That wasn't necessarily an outlandish pick by any means, but still my pick. So cool. um, but yeah, like you said, kind of teased it a little earlier with the New York's first match there, losing to Seattle and Mac, who was on New York last year. We see Asim get his revenge here against New York, and he let him know about it. He had that tweet after the game where it was the Rocker tweeted at, I gotta look it up because I
It
can't
was
remember
the "you
exactly what it
dropped
was.
this"
But it
meme,
was,
right?
yeah, but it was just, so who was it was oh, I think it was New York tweeted it at Rocker. Yeah, so New York tweeted it at Rocker on February 25th last year. Must have been when New York played Rocker for the first time or something. And it said, "Hey Rocker, you dropped something." And then Asim replies to that tweet from almost a year ago, "Hey Subliners, you dropped something." So that was some fun banter after the match that brought a little extra spice to things. But yeah, this was one match here we both necessarily didn't really see it going this way, just based again. All we really had to base this on was the kickoff classic. At least I don't want to speak for you here, but at least in my opinion, we saw LAG lose to Florida in the first round of the kickoff classic, whereas New York took down Boston. At least it played against Seattle, I think, after that. So we just saw a little bit more out of New York at the kickoff classic, and maybe expected them to come out of the win based on that. But that's not what happens here. We do see um, the Gorillas take a 2-0 lead, notably with a 6-0 win on Berlin Search. New York responds by taking the Tuscan control 3-2, and I closed out of my notes. So I think it was that they won in round 11, if or round 5 offense. Sorry. Um, now I'm scrambling, but yeah, that was the map like you mentioned that ASIM had that really nice streak on control and just went off, but New York does end up taking the win on offense, which although this is Tuscan control, it's not necessarily offensive favored by any means. So just based on the two maps we have for control and Vanguard right now, you expect to see a lot of defensive wins for control. So at this point, though, we're on. This is the last match of Saturday, and we had 3 matches before this go game 5. And we had just come off of London pulling off that reverse sweep over Optic, and then Toronto almost pulling off the reverse sweep against Seattle. So in my head, I was like, okay, just New York's going to win game 4 here, force us to a 20th map of the day, and we're going to have another game 5 series. But the Gorillas shut that down, and it was still a long day on Saturday. 19 maps is kind of nuts, but um, the Gorillas end up taking the second hard point there to win 3-1.
It would have been really, really crazy if New York won that game 4 hardpoint, because they got absolutely dominated in kills. Like Neptune 20 and 29, Clayster 17 and 33. Hydra had the best KD, 34 and 27. Crimsix 23 and 29. Nobody on the Gorillas had a negative KD. The worst would be Hook at 26 and 26. Asim and Gunless both had 30 plus, Slasher 27 and 22. And it was a 15-point difference. It was 250 to 235. That is absolutely ridiculous that it was even that close when they're like LAG is basically picking up all the kills on the map. But the win is what actually matters. But I just thought that was interesting that it really came down to the wire when, I mean, if you just look at KDs, it shouldn't have, just based on kills. But yeah, great win for LAG. They finished the week 1-1, and New York, they dropped to 0-2 to start the season. I mean, it's kind of hard to like we've said, it's the first week of the season, not a huge deal, and Seattle looks to be like really good. So losing to Seattle in the first match is not like really anything that you can like criticize them for. And LAG, like this was a close series in that they almost forced a game 5, and who knows what happens in game 5. So um, yeah, so great win for LAG, and they move on to the next week with a even record.
And I think just final takeaway for me too is, again, like you said, kind of not like, super panic mode for New York here, but the road definitely doesn't get any easier for them moving forward. For uh, the Major One qualifiers, they play LA Thieves this week coming up. It's their only match this week, I believe. Yeah, it's their only match. And the following week they play Boston and FaZe. So they certainly had a tough schedule here for these qualifier matches, but um, with the veteran leadership of Clay and Krim, I expect the squad to try to bounce back. Um, like we saw them play Boston in the kickoff classic, and they won that one. So I think if you look at those three matches, that's almost like a must-win match for them if they want to have a shot to not automatically start in the losers bracket of the major. But obviously the FaZe match is going to be tough for them, and based on what we've seen out of LA Thieves early, that should be an interesting match. So we're just going to have to keep an eye on this New York squad and see how they try to bounce back in these their three remaining matches before Major One.
On the last day, we started off with Paris and Florida. Florida, so they had a 3-0 loss to London to start the week. And then Paris, they lost a 3-2 series to Atlanta. Florida comes out and they win this 3-1. So Paris finishes 0-2, but like it's an impressive 0-2, especially for them. Like we've seen a lot worse from Paris, like in the past. And Florida, they are able to finish 1-1. This is a really great bounce back for them because they didn't look very good against London. Obviously, they got swept, but uh, you know, I think this is a great win for them, and I think it. I don't know if people are gonna like really criticize them for their roles or whatever, because we need to see more of it to actually get a better idea of like how this team actually plays with each other. But I think this is a good win for them to just kind of make sure that people aren't already on their case. What did you think of Florida's win?
I think that's a good point. Kind of like we mentioned earlier. Um, the big takeaway here was the bounce back and seeing the slaying from Florida this time around. And again, we're not gonna say whatever the server situation was for this map was why Florida was able to come out with a win compared to their match against London. But obviously the stats are drastically different here between the two series, and we see Vivid come out in particular and drop 46 kills in the Bokage hardpoint to kick things off, which I believe is the record right now. And I think they were counting Skies dropping 45 in the Kickoff Classic as like the benchmark before this. So I think 46, regardless of that, is just the highest we've seen so far. Obviously, only a week into the season, but I think that's the mark to beat right now for kills in a single game is 46 by Vivid. And again, that's on Bokage. Um, so we're gonna have to keep an eye on that throughout the rest of the season. But yeah, kind of like what you were saying about the roles for Florida. I think that my takeaway in regards to that is just Skies can use a sub. Like I was just saying, that I believe they were saying it was from the Kickoff Classic. I could be wrong from that, but I think that's the only thing that makes sense to me because they didn't play Bokage against London. He didn't drop the 45 here, so. But still, Skies can use a sub, and he was slaying pretty heavily with it in this series in particular. And so, for people, including myself, who were questioning the roles for this Florida team coming into the season, it looks like on a map like Bokage, which is heavily sub favored, we're gonna see Vivid, Awakening, and Skies all using subs, and that's something you might not have expected out of players like Skies and Awakening based on what we've seen them use weapon wise in the past. And I think Skies has looked good using an MP40 so far. And the question becomes, how good is the MP40 and how hard is it to use? But I don't think that really matters here, and I just think Skies looks good. is performing well with it so far, and we can keep an eye on the performance of Florida's roles. And this is a team like we were kind of talking about with the Gavutu control situation. I feel like that's a map that really favors a team like Florida, just because you could have Skies Awakening and Dave Patty all running ARs, and that doesn't like really change up the dynamic of the team that much. Um, so yeah, I think um, although we technically expected Florida to be 2-0 after this week, but based on that 3-0 loss to London, they bounce back here, pick up a win against Paris, who was looking good after a close loss to FaZe. Florida gets the job done, and we're just gonna have to keep an eye on them. I think that they're gonna be, kind of that the franchise stigma, at least based on last year. Certainly not in MW when they saw a lot of success and won the multiple home series events. But just based on last year, they were that middle of the pack team that could, like show up and string some wins together sometimes, and then in other cases they're just not looking strong and losing consecutive matches. So, going to come down to what Florida shows up on what particular day.
With Florida, it's going to be interesting to see how the meta shifts and how that affects them, because if the MP40 gets nerfed, like, and maybe ARs become more important at some point in the season, or just like ARs aren't going to be at nearly as big of a disadvantage on, say, Bokage as they are right now. Maybe that really helps them. Um, but yeah, like I always think like I think that's probably the most interesting part about some of these teams is like how they fit together role wise, because like I wouldn't say that Toronto has like all of this incredible talent. Like they're all incredibly talented, but it's not like these are like it's not like FaZe where this is a superstar roster with like essentially the best players on like each team getting together and like starting a team. Same with Optic, but the roles fit and therefore they're really good. And Florida has the potential, like we've been saying for the past year, like they have the potential to be really, really good and be a top team in the league, because I think that Skies is incredible, and like Awakening at moments is incredible and vivid. Like he's one of the most aggressive players. Like he has that Abizi factor where he makes people uncomfortable on the map and he gets in
Yep.
their face. So that is a really important aspect. So it should be very interesting to see how Florida continues on in this season. And then we had Atlanta versus LAT. LAT, this was their first and only match of the first week, and Atlanta, they were coming off of that 3-2 win against Paris. We both predicted that Atlanta would win, and Atlanta did win. They win 3-1 and beat LAT. They finished 2-0 this week. Any takeaways from this Atlanta versus LA Thieves match?
Yeah, I don't really remember this
I don't
map on
remember.
Hardpoint, and I mean, it was 250, 248, so I don't remember. I feel like LA Thieves was in the lead, and then like FaZe started to make a comeback, and then Thieves like closed it out or something. I can't really remember. I think I was watching the 0 to 100, like the LA Thieves documentary series, and they did it about the Kickoff Classic. So I think I'm mixing up the Thieves comeback against Optic from the Kickoff Classic with this one in my head. So I can't really remember this one, but I wrote down it was a good one. I may have to go back and watch it. But yeah, so the Thieves come out and take Tuscan Hardpoint 250, 248. And then after that, FaZe takes control of the series. It was 6-4 in the search. On Desert Siege, but then we see Tuscan control, which again, like I mentioned in the other one, we don't see Gavutu in this series, and I believe it's because FaZe vetoed it, and you would assume that's the case. Like they likely won the going coin toss, and at least for the control, vetoed Gavutu to play on Tuscan, and we see FaZe win that one 3-0. So obviously, again, that's something just we're gonna keep an eye on for FaZe. The Gavutu factor is what I'm gonna call it. Just to see how that plays out throughout the rest of the year. And then for the hardpoint, instead of seeing them play Gavutu hardpoint like we did in map one of Paris versus Atlanta, we see Atlanta unleash the Tiny Terrors on Bokage against LA Thieves, and they win that 250 to 136. So That's a little bit more what you expect from the Tiny Terriers when you got them running around with subs. And I think Celium really was the standout here, at least from a stats perspective, 86 and 60 for 1.43. I believe Breaking Point tweeted that he had the highest overall KD. I could be wrong. Yeah, they did. So overall KD leaders throughout the opening weekend, Celium had a 1.24 and Gizmo had a 1.21 in second. Sib was third, 1.18. Not gonna talk about Major Maniac because that's next match. But yeah, so Celium played well in the first week, which is what you expect from a strong player of his caliber. And this is just although the Thieves did play well in the kickoff classic, um, we were both expecting FaZe to win this one, and I think this series, aside from that super close map one, this is more of what we were expecting from FaZe.
Yeah, Celium, he's kind of underrated just because he teams with Simp and Abizi, and
Yeah,
like we talked about on our last week's episode, we predicted that Simp and Abizi would win MVP, and I don't think either of us really gave any mention to Celium, but that's like Celium was actually one of the MVP. I think he was
yeah,
one of the MVP candidates last year, so like he's one of the best players in the league, and
absolutely.
at times like he's the reason like he's like the difference maker on that team. Like when Simp isn't playing well and he's had those maps where he just doesn't look very good, like he comes up big and like he's a great search player, like ridiculously good. So obviously like Atlanta has no shortage of talent and Selim is awesome, and it just helps like to have another superstar player like him. But yeah, Atlanta wins this. Not a big surprise, and that's really not a shot at LAT. It's just we both kind of believe that Atlanta's just going to keep winning until
Yep.
they don't. So um, Atlanta wins that. They finish the week 2-0. And then in the last match of the week, we had Minnesota versus Optic. Minnesota, I believe they had not played at all. Yeah, so this was their first and only match of the week. They had the entire weekend to kind of watch everything. They got to see Optic's first match against London. And Optic, they give it their all, but Minnesota, they come up with the upset. They win 3-2. Optic finishes the week 0-2. What do you take away from Optic's loss to Minnesota here?
And you kind of mentioned it there that the Minnesota got to play or got to watch the matches before, and in particular, they got to watch Optic play. Um, that their opening series there against London, which obviously went down to a reverse sweep. So they got to watch 5 full maps of Optic VOD before going into the series. And that's something I mentioned on the last pod. Although we both picked Optic to win this one, I vividly remember saying that like I wouldn't be shocked if Minnesota came out and pulled off an upset. I had a gut feeling. I can't really explain it, but I just remember like saying like this is a match that I could just see Minnesota winning for whatever reason. And turns out that's what happens. Even though if I went with my gut there, I would have picked Minnesota to win, but I didn't. So bygones be bygones there. But again, this comes down to Game 5, Round 11, and Optic loses again. Ends the week 1-3 in S&D so far in the season, and that's the big takeaway for me. Kind of touched on it in uh, when we were talking about their previous match. It's just Optic historically has had struggles in S&D at times, but this is a different team. They have Rainbow coaching now. It's not just Sender. They have a superstar S&D player in Illy. Shout out Ego Chall, head correspondent Trem. Hope you're doing well and staying safe in China. But they have Illy, and they also have Shotzi, who's looked good in S&D early in his COD career. So you expect things to be a little different, at least in my eyes. I expected Search to be not necessarily their strongest mode. You still think with like guys like Dashy, Scump, and Shotzi, who are known to be heavy slayers, you still probably, at least in my eyes, think Hardpoint would be their best mode. But I also was expecting them to be slightly better in Search and Destroy, I guess, just off the rep. And um, I remember sending you the link to the Sean Collins piece, but I didn't end up adding it to the notes. I'm gonna
Okay.
scroll real quick and try to find it, but it was just mentioning that yeah, here it is. They're still deciding the roles for search and destroy, like small things like who's going to be the main shot caller and who's going to be the bomb carrier. And that might not sound like a big deal, but it's just something playstyle wise that when you got like there was a merger here between two CDL teams, and half of the lineups from both of those teams came together to form a new squad. So there's going to be conversations and stuff about playstyle. I think, Scump has mostly been a bomb carrier in recent years for Optic teams, and I feel like Shotzi also was, but I could be wrong on that. Um, Regardless of that, it's just something that it might not seem like a big deal from an outside perspective, but to like the play style and the way you move on the map and stuff, it is a big deal because like just speaking from personal experience, obviously I'm not playing on the caliber of these guys or anything like that, but when I'm playing GBs just with Trem and the boys, like I like to be that bomb carrier because I consider myself to be a selfless player. I don't really care if I die. I want to get that objective down and try to set the squad up for wins. So that's just something, a very dumb example, but just saying that, like, trying to figure out. I feel like the shot caller for the team, you would expect it to be Illy just based on his S&D prowess. But it's something, Scump is a more veteran player. Maybe he wants to take on shot calling duties, or maybe he wants to have absolutely no shot calling duties. Who knows? It's just something. Um, it's early in the season, and we're gonna have to see again throughout the year how Optic bounces back from this O2 week, and in particular, how they bounce back and try to improve their S&D moving forward.
Yeah, you're absolutely right about you know what you said about these two teams are this team is essentially two teams mashed together because you had half of the Dallas Empire and you had half of the Optic Chicago roster, and when everything merged and in Optic Chicago or Dallas Empire they merged and they become Optic Texas, these two rosters, like instead of having Crim Six and Clayster, or not Clayster, excuse me, having Crim Six and Vivid on Dallas, which was a very good roster, and like you had Formal last year on Optic, it just like it's a it's a philosophical thing. Like Crimsix has naturally been a shot caller, like a leader at least, as far as we know, like for the past few years for his various teams. And it just, I don't know like what the dynamics are in Optic, but S&D is something that they have historically struggled at, and like you said, it's a different roster, but it's also just something that we continuously see, and it's because Search and Destroy is the most difficult game mode for players because like it's a lot slower, like it's a lot more thinking involved than Hardpoint, where Bokuch Hardpoint you're not thinking, you're just running and you're shooting things. So for Search and Destroy, there's a lot more downtime, and I think I should also point out that of the 4 Search and Destroy maps that Optic played this weekend, 3 of them were round 11s. So
Yeah,
they won the first round 11 against London, uh, and then they lost the second one, and then they obviously lost this game 5 round 11 against Minnesota, which is I mean it's disappointing, but it's also not the end of the world. I know some
yep.
Optic fans are probably at the edge of they're at their breaking point already because like they're just I don't know, like moving on. Optic is they're not in trouble, I don't think. They
No.
do have some things to figure out, but every team does. We've even talked about Atlanta, who we both agree is the best team, and they've been the best team for a long time now, and they still have things to work on and things to improve on. So it's not the end of the world that Optic went 0-2. Does it suck for them because it could really like hurt their chances at the major? Of course, but the first major is really not that important. Like if you don't do well at the first major, it's not the end of the world still because there are several more majors and you'll still have a chance to make up for it if you're a really good team down the road.
Yeah, and that was going to be my final takeaway here. I like how you mentioned they played 3 round 11s. It's not like they were absolutely getting smoked in Search and Destroy. I just remember, I don't know why I still remember it. I can't tell you when the match was, but I remember when Optic Chicago played Atlanta FaZe last year, there was a series where they lost in game 5 to the Atlanta squad, and it was like they lost both searches 6-1 and 6-0. It was like
I think it was their first
FaZe.
meeting.
I think it might have been, yeah, but I don't know why I still remember that so specifically. But yeah, they won like the Optic lost like 12 of 13 potential rounds in Search and Destroy. Not only did they lose both maps, but like literally only won 1 of 13 rounds or something along those lines. So it's not like they're struggling to that extent here. They're playing some close maps, they're winning rounds. Um, and at the end of the day, yeah, like you said, 0-2 is definitely not ideal for them. Um, but I don't think, this is a major issue. It's just we're going to have to see how they bounce back. And I think they have the tools. They certainly have the talent. They have the coaching staff behind them to try and figure this out and make any adjustments to improve moving forward. But I think one thing I will bring up before we move on, could you imagine this scenario if the CDL didn't change the format to allow all 12 teams at the major, where Optic is sitting at 0-2 right now with 3 matches to go and potentially being in like that bottom 4 to miss the Optic Texas major?
That'd be cool. Like just for the total meltdown that everyone would have. Wasn't there like was I dreaming or wasn't there a proposal that like if you were hosting the LAN then you would have like a play-in? But so
I think
like
Prone reported that.
so if you like it would be crazy if Optic had like an own like whatever and they missed their LAN or whatever. But what if they just had an awful qualifying stretch and then like just because they host the LAN, they play the play-in and they win that and they get in over a team that did better than them in the qualifying matches. Like the meltdown from that would also be at like a historical level. It would be
That
incredible.
this is just, it is a what if situation that we no longer have to worry about because all 12 teams are at all the majors.
The
But it is
the
fun to think about.
the what if right now is what if Optic just continues to lose and then they get to the major and then they lose like again and they get knocked out and they look completely awful in the first stretch of the season. Like I we talked about it last year where Optic they were having like a rough stretch of things and we said like what is the solution because like this roster is really good so you can't change the roster really like who is going to be an upgrade and I think the same could be said this year like if and I'm just like I'm what ifing obviously uh like there's really not a ton of players that you could add to their roster that will probably make them better like I guess maybe just a role wise like having a shot caller if nobody's really comfortable with it or something like that. But from a talent perspective, they're one of the most talented rosters like I've ever
Yep.
seen just based on like who they are. So obviously just a lot of hypotheticals, but it would be pretty cool to see either Optic come back and be really good or Optic not come back and be really bad. Everything would be cool.
I think we just to segue into our next topic. Optic does have a slight advantage, in my opinion, in the sense they only play 1 match in this upcoming week. Um, their opponents they play Paris this week, and then they move on to play 2 matches against Toronto and Boston in the following week. So those could be tough matches. But I think they're just at an advantage in the sense that they aren't playing 2 matches in the week following their O2 performance. They only have 1 match this week, giving them a lot of time to prepare and focus on that 1 match and try to fix anything internally they think they need to fix. And then they have another week on top of that for those 2 matches. Um, Ahead of just like considering they're playing Paris versus playing Toronto in 2 weeks, like they have more time to prepare for a harder match on paper.
Yeah. So let's segue. Very smooth segue here. Let's go into our predictions for the second week of matches. Again, we have actually. So is this right? We have four on. Yeah, so we have four on Friday, four on Saturday, and two on Sunday, which
They
is
changed it. They announced today they changed it because of the Super Bowl.
oh yeah, yeah. Who
So
day?
the fourth match here on Friday was supposed to be the final match on Sunday, and they just flexed it to Friday.
Okay, so that makes sense. So yeah, four matches on Friday, February 11th, and then four on Saturday, February 12th, and then two matches on Sunday, February 13th. Let's get started at the very top. We have matches between two. I mean, Boston did really well in the first week, and Paris looked pretty good, all things considered. Who do you got here, Boston versus Paris?
Yeah, we can try to speed run through these
Yeah.
predictions, but um, I'm gonna go with Boston here. I think you know, sorry to let down Mike and the Paris is winning champs crew, but um, just I feel like Boston should be considered the better team right now. And who knows? It could be a situation here again where we see maybe Paris back in a series with Gavutu, and a team like Boston doesn't really. I mean, I believe TJ is like technically their flex, and he's historically been a sub player. I think Nero is more of a flex and has used an AR in the past, but again, that could be a map for Boston where I don't really know who they're. I mean, I guess you would see methods TJ and Nero running the three ARs, but again, I don't know. That's just speculation. Doesn't really matter what the maps are or anything like that. Um, I'm just gonna go with Boston.
Yeah, I'm gonna go with Boston too. I mean, I'm not on the Paris is winning champs bandwagon as much as Mike is, but they did look a lot better last week than I
Yeah,
was expecting. But Boston, I just think they'll win here. Minnesota versus Seattle. I guess I'll go first. I'll just say Seattle. They looked really good, so I don't really see any reason why I wouldn't pick them, even though Paris in their one match beat Optic. So Seattle
Minnesota.
surge here. Who, you're going with Minnesota? Okay.
No. You said Paris won their one match against Optic.
Oh, I have Paris on
You
the
meant
brain. Yeah.
yeah. um,
Um. Yeah.
I'm going with Seattle as well here, but I'm going to stick with the caveat that I stuck with last time and say, I'm going to pick Surge and expect them to let me down and Minnesota pull off an upset. I don't have that same feeling I had for Minnesota's one match last week. But again, this could be a sneaky good team here, and they might be able to pull off, which I guess you would consider an upset at this point. Still going to go with Seattle here, though.
Toronto versus LAG. I picked LAG in the first match of the week, and then I didn't pick them in the second, and I was wrong on both accounts. So I'm going to not pick them in the first match this week and go with Toronto.
I'm going with Toronto here too. I think we only saw Toronto play that one match last week, I believe, right? They only played one match
Yeah.
against Seattle, yeah. Um, so not a lot to go off of from them, not counting the kickoff classic, but I just think this is a matchup that could be super entertaining. It's two super talented rosters on paper. Um, excited to see this one go down, but I think at the end of the day, Toronto wins it.
And the final match on Friday is New York versus the Los Angeles Thieves. I mean, I want to pick New York, but they didn't inspire a whole lot of confidence last week, so I'll go with the Thieves.
That's same line of thinking I'm going with here. Is I feel like before last week's performance, I probably would have just picked New York. Like if we did like a all major qualifiers predictions or something without seeing
Oh
them
my
play at all,
God.
I probably would have picked New York here. But just based off recent performances, I'm gonna go with the Thieves here. Although again, Thieves we only saw them play phase. That's obviously a tough opponent and. Not to say that New York's opponents weren't tough necessarily, but they didn't play phase. So I'm expecting this one to be a good one too. But I'll go with the Thieves.
On Saturday, we kick off with Minnesota versus London. I'm gonna go with Minnesota. They beat Optic. London looked really good as well, so nothing to take away from them. But I'll go with
London
Minnesota.
also beat Optic.
Yeah, but Minnesota is Minnesota. I feel a little more confident about that pick.
I'm going Minnesota too. Um, we could be in a scenario here where we're just continually picking against London and they just go like 5-0, maybe win major one, maybe London is winning champs. Who knows at this point?
If that happens,
Uh,
they owe us a paycheck.
but I'm going Minnesota.
Next one we have Paris and Optic Texas. I mean, Paris they play the first match of Friday. Maybe they beat Boston, maybe they don't. Optic coming into this, like you said, this is their only match of the week after a very disappointing 0-2 start to the season. Who do you got, Optic versus Paris?
I'm going with Optic. I feel like I have to still. Um, kind of like I touched on just a couple minutes ago. Feel like the team's gonna prepare. They got some VOD to look at from Paris. There's two matches last week, and this is the only match they have to focus and prepare on for this week. So I'm expecting Optic to try to bounce back and catch the W here.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, Optic, they had very close losses in both of their series. Um, we talked about it a lot, but yeah, Optics is still a very talented team, and I think they beat
Yep.
Paris here. Then we have Atlanta versus Boston. Boston coming off of a match against Paris the previous day. Atlanta went 2-0 last week. I mean, no surprise here, but I'm going with Atlanta.
Yeah, I am too. We unfortunately have the exact same pick so far, and
It's because
I
we're
just
both
am
very
not
smart
feeling.
people.
I'm just not feeling courageous enough to go out on a limb here and pick the Boston upset. Um, I will be excited here to see Capital go up against the Tiny Terrors. That could be a good one. But um, yeah, end of the day, like we've said multiple times on this podcast, picking Atlanta until they give me a reason not to, and they haven't given me a reason not to. So phase up.
Final match of Saturday, LA Thieves versus Florida. This is a match that we actually might disagree on. Who do you have between the Thieves and the Mutineers?
I don't think we're gonna. I'm going with the Thieves. I mean, this could be another situation here where this might be a trap match because we've only seen the one match from the Thieves, and who knows, maybe New York comes out, takes care of business on Friday. Thieves are tilted, and they don't have a strong showing against Florida. But without having the advanced knowledge of how the Thieves look against New York, I'm just going to expect the Thieves to win this one against Florida.
I'm gonna go with Florida. I think some online stuff is gonna be really annoying for these teams
Ooh,
because this
that's a good
is
factor.
Miami
Yeah.
versus LA. So this is like as big of a. I mean, Boston is probably Boston, Toronto. Any LA team is just at an inherent disadvantage usually. So I'm
That's
assuming
a
that they'll
good
probably
point.
be like in Dallas. They use the Dallas server,
You
but
would hope.
or Chicago. I don't know. So yeah, I'm gonna go Florida. I'm sure, like, I will almost guarantee that there will be a subtweet about the online stuff after this match. So I'll
Mark
go
it down.
Florida.
All
And
right,
then we
that's a
have,
good point though. Kudos to you for that.
yeah, I mean, we already saw it with Florida in week one, so let's just think that's going to happen in week two.
All
And
right.
then the last two matches of the week, we have London versus LAG and Toronto versus Florida. I'll start. I'll say LAG. I did not pick them in the first match, so maybe that'll be good luck. But yeah, I also just think they're a better team than London, or they should be a better team, I guess. But I'll pick Gorillas here.
Yeah, I want to pick London just so we have more differences. But I'm not gonna, and I'm gonna go with the Gorillas. So, um, at this point now, we will have picked London to go 0-4, and I guess there's technically the potential for them to go 4-0 against us. But that happens. Good on them. I'll go with the Gorillas.
Yeah. And then we have Toronto versus Florida. I mean, this is like one of those matches, like one of these weeks where we don't disagree a whole lot because we have a very limited sample size of how much like how good these teams are, or how bad these teams are. So I mean, it's whatever. I'll go with Toronto because
Yep.
I mean, it's Toronto, so
Yep. Same for me. But it is worth mentioning, like you said, the online factor here, Florida to Toronto. Some funky stuff could happen that we're not really anticipating. But end of the day, this is a match I just expect Toronto to win.
yeah. I mean, it's just how it is. It's
Yep.
online play. It's qualifying matches. There are only 12 teams in the CDL, so like there's not you're not going to disagree like in the NFL there are 32 teams, so all of these teams they never play each other until like once a year, and if it's a division rival they play twice a year. It's like it's just a different thing with only 12 teams, and we've only seen at most two matches from each team. So yeah, not a huge deal that we agree. Maybe it'll boost my record this week because I believe I went 3-7 last week. You went 6-4. So
Yeah.
not a great showing from me, but maybe we'll do a little bit better next time, or I'll do a little bit better this week.
Yep.
Is there anything else? I'm trying
We
to think.
don't have to talk about it too much, but I just want to bring up that the Call of Duty released the roadmap for season 2 of Vanguard and Warzone today. Season 2 officially drops on Valentine's Day, February 14th. Um, it was delayed. I think it was supposed to be earlier. I don't think it was this week. I think it was delayed 2 weeks. So I think it was technically supposed to drop last week or last Tuesday. Regardless, the season 2 roadmap is dropped. There were leaks. I don't think there were really any like super credible leaks, but there were like rumors that we mentioned earlier in the offseason that like USS Texas was found in the game files and might have been like a season 2 DLC map or something. But that is not the case. There are two new multiplayer maps being added in season 2, Gondola and Casablanca. Let me just look real quick here. I briefly read through the blog post, which was super long, but I believe they mentioned like one of the maps was a 3-lane map. So let me see. So the description for Casablanca is a shining jewel of Morocco. Casablanca is a medium-sized 3-lane style map with a bustling marketplace with several buildings to explore and climb upon. Expect a variety of vertical engagements that invite a variety of close to long-range tactics.
A lot of
Uh,
variety.
Gon- Gondola is also described. Don't look down on this medium-sized 3-lane style map. Take a trip on the gondola to travel above a large gulch and fire watchtower. I'm just going to stop reading there because I think if there's a moving gondola, it's not going to be a competitive map. But it is interesting. We're getting two new medium-sized 3-lane maps. So I guess there is the potential for maybe these maps to be added in the competitive map pool, but again, we're not going to know until those maps are actually dropped and we see how they play, and then maybe the pros start testing them a little bit in scrims or something. Not sure, but that is something to keep an eye on just with this update. There are new guns and perks being added as well with season 2. I don't think that they'll likely just be either G8 or banned, so I don't think that'll be a big deal. The sticky bomb is being added as a lethal equipment. I believe that's the same exact like sticky grenade we saw in World War II, which was also made um, by Sledgehammer. So that could play a factor in competitive play moving forward, but they have either, I think it's officially banned now, the Game and Bomb, just because there are no trophies and there's really no counter to it. It was just a grenade that like exploded on impact and you literally couldn't do anything if it's just like thrown at you and hit you. There's no counter to it. It's not like, like a frag where someone has to cook it for 5-ish seconds to make it so like they throw it perfectly to the point where it explodes on you and kills you. But that's just something worth bringing up. I don't know if the sticky bomb will play a factor in competitive play, but it's being added to the game in season 2, and it could be something that we see down the road. Just gonna have to keep an eye on that. But outside of those new additions, the big takeaway from today is that ranked play is finally coming to Vanguard over 3 months after the release of the game. Um, they called it in the blog post the ranked play beta, which is interesting that they're saying it's a beta probably because there's inevitably going to be some bugs and issues with ranked play at launch, and They're gonna have to fix that. So I think that's where that comes in. They're gonna be like, this is just a beta where we can fix it before the real ranked play starts or whatever. But regardless of that, there will be some form of a ranked playlist in Vanguard on Valentine's Day. So if you don't have any other plans on Valentine's Day, like me, you can find me playing ranked play on Vanguard. Um, yeah, that's just the main takeaway there. They said also that it will be a bespoke multiplayer ranked play mode launching in beta at the start of season 2, featuring league approved rules, visible skill ratings, and new competitive rewards, among other innovations from Treyarch and Sledgehammer. Stay tuned later this week for more information in a dedicated broadcast from the CDL and Treyarch. So we could find out more about ranked play later this week, and then we can likely just touch on it at the end of our pod next week. But yeah, ranked play is finally coming to Vanguard.
Yeah, I'll bite my tongue on anything about ranked play or the fact that Vanguard has a bunch of bugs but isn't technically a beta. So I won't mention any of that. We'll talk about it on a later podcast. But I'm glad that it's actually coming for the people that play Vanguard and the competitive scene. Like, it's obviously a good thing that ranked play, even a bad ranked play, is better than no ranked play. So it's always a good thing to have it. But so yeah, and I mean, more maps is awesome. Just keep adding maps. Like, even if they're bad, just keep adding them to the game, just so people can like play around with them, and hopefully some will find their way into competitive, so we can have more than 2 control maps, and we can actually have like a proper veto system, which would be
And
enjoyable.
yeah, and I don't want to drag the show on too much longer, but I think with season 1, Radar was added to Vanguard, and that's a remake of Dome from MW3. And I'm not even sure if like the pros tried out Radar at all for any of the competitive maps. Obviously, Hardpoint wasn't a mode in MW3, and Dome was a small map in MW3. Radar is a small map, so I don't really think Hardpoint would have worked out. But like CTF was kind of enjoyable in MW3 back in the day on Dome. So maybe there could have been some way to make control work on that. I don't really know, but I don't even know if it was really tested. So I'm not sure if these new maps in season 2 are going to be tested. But like you said, we're not getting like a remake like last year. We got Raid and the Standoff and Express like that. That's not happening here with season 2. So we're getting 2 brand new maps that potentially the pros could try out, or they just won't touch them at all, and we'll have the same map pool that we have right now.
Yeah. I wonder which one is more likely. Um, yeah. So we've been going for about an hour and a half. This is one of our longer episodes in a while. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe or like the podcast or follow the podcast wherever you're listening or watching on. We're on YouTube. We're on Twitch. We do the live shows every week on Twitch at twitch.tv/Ego Podcast. So if you're listening to this or you're watching on YouTube, you can watch the live show. Maybe we'll do episodes a little bit earlier in the day. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Whoa.
Maybe we'll talk about it.
Intel.
We'll talk about it in a later episode. But yeah, make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts and follow us on Twitter. He's at JBink with 2 Ks. I'm at Pres Byers, and the podcast Twitter is at Ego Chall Podcast. We hope to be back here next Tuesday, which would be February 15th. So a little bit right after ranked play drops, and Bink can give us a first-hand account of how ranked play is going without Olympic trim by his side. So, well, we hope to be back here next week, live show. And yeah, that's it for me. Take it away, Bink.
Yep. Thank you guys, as always, for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed. Now that the season has officially started, we're most likely going to get back into that more regular routine of weekly shows. Like if you were following us last year, that's basically what we did last year. So that's what we're most likely going to do moving forward for this year. So thank you guys for the support now. If you've been with us this whole time, thank you for all the support along the journey. as usual, if you have any feedback or anything like that you want to shoot our way, just reach out, let us know what you got, and we're always looking for ways to improve the show. But hope you enjoyed. Thank you as always for tuning in, and remember to send the chow.